Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host, and once again have this great privilege from EWTN to sit with you to hear the story of someone's journey towards Jesus Christ in the church. Our guest is Father Jeff Skip Thompson, and I think there's enough room to put at the bottom of the screen all the places that you were visited in your journey. You're a revert, former Pentecostal, Lutheran, Reformed, and Baptist, and then now you're here in clerics. Father Skip, it's great to have you on The Journey Home.
Marcus, thank you very much. It's great to be with you. I've been connected with you in one way or another for 12 years.
That's right.
Going back to when I contacted Jim Anderson, I think it was in 2004, 2005 in there. As a Protestant seminarian at the Baptist seminary, a Bethel seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I was doing some denominational research to figure out where should I be? Where should I put the roots down? So it's been a great help.
You're talking about connecting with the Coming Home Network, and you're a reminder that we do get connected by people from all different places in their journey. And for whatever reason, the Lord has opened their heart to like in your list of former Pentecostal, Lutheran, Reformed, Baptist, Catholic slips in there, and what do you do with it? So, and now you're with the Society of the Missionaries of the Holy Apostles, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So let me back out, and let's take you away, because you're a revert, so you started somewhere familiar, so let's go way back.
I received the sacraments, baptized on June 14th, 1953, at Our Lady of Angels Catholic Church in Hermiston, Oregon. The first of 4 sons. And so I grew up around the Catholic Church. My dad was Episcopalian. He later converted. But we really didn't practice the faith. Along with my 4 brothers, we were pretty rambunctious in the pews. And it was tough sledding, between the tickle fights and everything else. We lobbied against going to church after a while. We really didn't get it. And the folks weren't terribly devout, so pretty much unchurched. And so when I received the sacraments, Holy Communion, I remember that in Madonna del Sasso Church in Salinas. We'd moved to California, and later as a young family. And so I grew up then in that Monterey County area, and I was confirmed in St. Theodore's Church in Gonzales, California. But like many of my age, I took that as the sacrament of exit. And I said, okay, I'm out of here. I've graduated from God, and now I can engage real life. And
so you would have been baptized when it was Latin. And then,
Latin.
Then, so in your teen years is Vatican II, and all that's changing with the church.
Yeah, it shifted. I remember as a young kid not clueless about what's going on in the Mass, and so it was hard, very hard. And at any rate, having still the grace of those sacraments, they followed me, and I at least remembered it in college that I have one shot at getting this life on the right foot. And
so you had a belief in God?
I had a belief in God. It was kind of in the background. I was much more engaged in engaging the bowl of cherries that I thought life was, And I was at junior college, and I remember finding a 4 Spiritual Laws tract. And I read, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. It sounded great. You're a sinner, and you need to, come to Jesus and pray the sinner's prayer and find a fellowship. And I prayed that by myself, and then I started going to different churches, and America is this great shopping mall of Christianity, and it's 31 flavors, pick one. And so I tried Pentecostal, Lutheran, and finally a Reformed church. I'd moved to from the Monterey County area, Monterey Diocese, where I grew up, junior college there, and then went up to the University of California at Davis and attended a Reformed church there at Davis. And I recall many of my Christian roommates were engaging in youth ministries, and they were pursuing seminary. And I felt like I was also called, but rather than just jump off into it, not sure where I would go, I interviewed 7 pastors in the Davis area and asked them 2 questions. Why are you in the denomination you're in? And if you had it all to do over, what would you do differently? And each one had been born, raised in their particular faith tradition, and really didn't question it. So I didn't have any guidance there. But they also said that they would have liked to have had a little more real-life experience before they launched into seminary studies. So I kind of took that as the good direction. So I did. I was interning in the state capitol in California. Sacramento was nearby. And I had this beautiful Christian girlfriend, and we eventually married. My little career in the capitol kind of took steps forward, and life looked pretty good.
Now, I don't mean to interrupt again, but you said you had this Pentecostal, Lutheran, Reformed journey, especially the Pentecostal. All of those would have been Christian traditions that probably would have tried to make sure you had a relationship with Christ.
Absolutely.
So I mean, had that really brought a faith awakening to you during those years?
Yeah, exactly. I would say at that point I was consciously seeking to follow Christ. Okay. So that was real. As my new life began, as married life, unfortunately, after our first child, there were some major issues that later precipitated the death of our first son. And that was that was what I call the problem of evil up close and personal. And I could not reconcile a God who loved me, who is sovereign, to whom I would, I'd go to church 3 times a week with my wife and my daughter, and then, give 10% of the income. So I was on board and got treated like this. I thought, what in the world? And so it was a huge faith crisis. And even though we stayed together another 7 years and we had another child, and everything was okay with that, I was just emotionally just a wreck. My faith was on the rocks. I felt if God was all-knowing, he would have known this was going to happen. If he was all-loving, he would have intervened. And somehow, why would he let this occur? I just couldn't, I could not resolve the issue.
And one part about the Christian faith is, if this is happening, why?
Yeah.
What did I do? There's a a part of our understanding of reality is that there's a connection here, and if this happened, well, there's got to be.
Yeah. It was sort of a Deuteronomic theology. If you're obedient to God, and you're going to be blessed. If you're rebellious, you're going to get cursed. And so I was like, I was obedient. Why'd I get this? What's the deal? So I felt like God had reneged on his promise for an abundant life. Yeah. My idea of abundant life was I get what I want. So. And I didn't have a full sense of God using, what I'll call the good, the bad, and the ugly in that chess game of spirituality where we win. But we go through tough stuff, and bad things do happen to good people. But ultimately, if our horizon is in this world only, like everything under the sun is vanity, as Solomon says, but when we raise our horizon to eternity where God dwells, then life, death, he's got it all. And it's just a question of timing for all of us, right? So anyway, I was in a temporal sphere, and I'd lost my son, and my marriage fell apart. And I was just off as a workaholic in the state capitol as a registered lobbyist going great guns. And, money, sex, and power is the name of the game, right? So I was perfectly well distracted for about 18 years.
Wow.
But the wound, the loss of my son, and there's always a message attached to the wound, which is why we medicate ourselves with our particular, alcoholism, whatever it happens to be. The message attached to my wound was, you can't trust God. He's probably not there. Why pray? You're on your own. Do the best you can. Enjoy life. And go for the gusto, because it doesn't matter. That was the message, and it was an apostasy that I just sort of like, well, sure, why not? I mean, I tried it as a Christian, look what happened. And so my heart was a shambles. Never could recover the ability to remarry. I tried to, it just wasn't going to happen again. But then I have with time now, I have this observation that we have a couple of things that happen in our lives. We have desolations and consolations. The desolations occur when the bad stuff happens, and there are moments of conversion that occur, or can. We have a choice, we always do, turn toward God or away from God. Moments of consolation come to bring us healing when we have turned toward God. Then the grace is free to flow because we're not resisting Him. And so I was in the midst of a long, expanded desolation where I was just sort of medicating myself with what I call workaholism and success and just, pursuit of, wine, women, and property, basically. And then I hit another desolation. I hit a wall in 2001. On June 19th of 2001, my father died, and he'd become my mentor. He was a lovely man. We got along famously. One of those life of the party kind of guys, great sense of humor, smart, sharp, World War II veteran, Navy combat guy. I admired him greatly. He was a hero to me, but he was gone. And then I was kind of a fitness buff at the time, shattered my right arm in a moving accident. It's still held together with plates and screws. So that was shot, and you're in a cast and everything's atrophying. And then I lost my job, my high-powered job. So life stopped. And I was, I like to quote some rock and roll lyrics occasionally because there's almost this theological truth that comes out of these artists sometimes. And I was quoting...
regardless of them.
Regardless of them, right. I've got a couple of them I can give you, but James Taylor wrote a beautiful song called Fire and Rain.
Oh, of course.
And there's a line in there where he says, I've been walking my mind to an easy time, my back turned towards the sun. Lord knows, when the cold wind blows, it'll turn your head around, right?
Yeah.
And the cold wind was blowing, and I turned my head around finally, turned back toward the sun, S-U-N and S-O-N, and the light of that movement then began a series of consolations. So I had not been in church for 18 years since the loss of my son, and been single for about 14 years. And I remember the first order of business now, because I was open to grace, was the healing of that wound of my son. So I was beginning to do my daily quiet times. I was reading, and I started going to a good Baptist church. A great friend of mine from days at University of California, Davis, a man named Dave DeRoos, Dave and Evie DeRoos, dear friends to this day, told me about Oak Hills Church in Folsom, California, near Sacramento, and I started going there. And I remember talking to Pastor Kent Carlson, and I said, I'm going to start coming, but here's my story. And I'll come, but don't ask me to pray, because I don't want to risk this relationship with God by prayer. He was like, well, what are you talking about? I said, here's the thing. I explained, I don't know what to think about God. I want God. But if I pray and it doesn't happen, I'm done. I'm cooked. I was that smoldering wick, which the Lord would not extinguish, or the bruised reed He won't break. So I was coming, hat in hand. I'll say, I'd like to come, because they were wonderful men of God, and they were sincere Christ followers, and I just soaked it up. But shortly after this turn back, I had a kind of a consolation once while praying. And I'd been reading the scriptures, and I had this dream. It was a vivid dream, and it was my son, Michael, in an alb, arms outstretched, and I sensed him saying, without speaking, I could hear this, Dad, I'm fine. We're worried about you. And I remember just with a start, and I journaled this. It was in April, I think it was about April 22nd. If you want, I can show you the journal entry. I described that. And so for the first time in 15 years, I went out to the cemetery took me 45 minutes to find the grave. I just wanted to forget. And I remember finding the grave, praying, crying, and then, looking at my watch. Well, it's time to go to my appointment at the auto body shop, so back to the real world. But that was a wonderful, reconnection. So I go there, and the man says, okay, sit in the office here. I'll go out to see your car. Now, my name is Thompson. His name was Michael, my son. So I'm sitting in the office, and he's checking it out, and I'm looking around, and I'm looking at awards and certificates and everything, and I'm looking at Michael Thompson, Michael Thompson, Michael Thompson, Michael Thompson, surrounded by this. And I was just floored, and I thought, what are the odds? 15 years, I finally go out to see his gravestone where he's lying in peace in death, his name right there. And then an hour later, I'm in a body shop, and he's come to me in life and showing himself all over. Now, that's subjective. That's a consolation for me. And I think God meets us where we need to be, where we need ministry, right? I needed healing from that wound. So that began this wonderful restoration.
Our guest is Father Jeff Skip Thompson. God really does work that way. There are little miracles that he does that are for us.
Yes. Yes.
They don't always transfer to other folk.
No.
They don't have, but they're for us.
They're for you, because he knows you personally.
Yeah.
He loves us. He calls us by name, right? So there's these milestones, and I really recommend anybody who's watching, journal. If you don't, if you want to have a conscious, deliberate journey toward Christ, when you get a milestone like this, and that's what it was for me. It was such a recovery. So I made notes, and it continued like that. When I began my fellowship with the Baptists, they invited me to join this leadership center for getting deeper in the faith. And I said, I'm all whatever you want. You want me to be a janitor? I don't care. Just let me be part of it. And the pastor had invited me, so I was all into it. That went for an academic year, and at the end of that time, we had a retreat. I was out in Monterey, kind of my old stomping grounds out there, the Pajaro Dunes. And at the end of that retreat, of course, my daughter's grown up and she's in college, and she's down in the kind of south central California, an area called San Luis Obispo. And I'm in Monterey, and it's connected by this magnificent highway called Highway 1 that goes through the Big Sur region, right? So the date I decided to go down to see her after the retreat, it's June 19th. Anniversary of my father's passing. So I'm driving down this beautiful Highway 1, and as I'm cruising along, I notice a sign, a little sign. I saw a little cross on it, zip by, and there's no businesses down there. There's nothing other than 110 miles of just a few private homes. It's a tremendous, magnificent view, and but I got the distinct impression I've got to go up that road. And I didn't really know what was there. But I turned back and I went up this thing. It rolled up 1,000 feet on the top of kind of a little shelf of land. And there was a compound of some kind, and I parked in this parking area, and I walked in to what turned out to be a little bookstore. And there was a monk kind of dressed like me back there. And I kind of went up to him. I said, wow, I didn't know you were here, and I apologize if I'm trespassing. I'll leave. But this is a special day for me, that I would discover you on this day. And he goes, well, why's that? I said, well, my father died on this day, June 19th, a couple years ago. And he looked at me, and he goes, well, that's fascinating, because the founder of our order, the Camaldolese Benedictines, St. Romuald, also died on this very same day. And he goes, I think your father and our father have been talking to each other, and you're here. I went, wow, you couldn't make that up. And he says, I think you should have a retreat here. I said, but I'm a Baptist. And he goes, oh, that's okay. We get lots of Baptists here. I said, well, that's great. So I started going. And that began this drawing. And I want to talk about, I mean, I'm not that cerebral guy. I mean, I didn't go through all kinds of doctrinal comparisons. This was a heart thing. And these kind of milestones were just starting to pop up. And I remember saying, I said, well, I'll come back for retreat. And I did. And I came back about every 6 months for some years. But the beauty that I was experiencing began to just impact me. First of all, the physical setting of New Camaldoli Hermitage, which is where I was, is stunning. And it's so conducive to prayer. And the thing that then struck me when I first came and came into the chapel and saw, I'd never seen monks in the divine office. And boy, I thought my daily quiet time was a good thing. When I saw these consecrated men who'd given their lives to God, left everything behind, and were praying vigils, lauds, the Mass, and Vespers, you know, in this rhythm that just sanctified the entire day, I was stunned at how beautiful this was, this expression of faith. And then the Holy Mass, the Eucharist itself. There was a sense of the sacred. There was a sense of presence I couldn't deny. My old Catholic graces were there, like working on
Were you intellectually connecting it with your past, or was that so far off the window?
No, it was still, well, it was familiar.
Yeah.
In sort of a, you know, when you've come back to a place you were years ago and you see it again. It was that way, but this time it was a little deeper, because now I wanted to be there. And before it was like, oh, let's get out of here. But now God was truly present. I was turned toward Him, and I wanted this presence in my own life. And so it's like what Blaise Pascal says: the heart has reasons that reason knows not. And that's what was happening. And but I'm still going to by this time I've kind of gone to another level in my theological training. I'd gone through this leadership center. Now I was going to seminary, the Bethel Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, fine Baptist seminary, and I was learning a lot there. But then, of course, the question becomes one of denominational discernment. Where am I going to land?
In fact, I was going to think some of the audience may not understand this kind of decision at a Protestant seminary.
Okay, yeah. Well, essentially, if you want to call it theological graduate school, it's a very individual discernment. A person would, like myself, feeling drawn to ministry, would apply, get the transcripts, letters of recommendation, pay the fees, start going. And at the end of that project, whether it's a 2-year degree or a 3-year Master of Divinity, then you respond to a denomination that you're attached to and offer. And the question of call is then either affirmed or denied, in a sense that, you know, either you're going to plant a church, or you're going to receive a pastorate somewhere, or a youth pastor, usually some kind of assistant work. But you
end up with an MDiv degree.
MDiv.
You got your master's degree, but you're sending out your resumes and finding churches that are looking for a pastor, and that's with a connection.
Right.
And you're not ordained until you get that job.
Yeah. And so I was in that process of saying, well, where do I want to set up? Well, toward the end of that, so we're into 2004, right in there, and I'm beginning to think Catholic, because I'm finding that in our leadership center we drew on Teresa of Avila, current authors Henry Nouwen and Thomas Merton, and we're going, well, these guys are good. There's some depth here in this Catholic. Well, imagine that, you know. Got a 1,500 years head start on Martin Luther, right? So, but nonetheless, you know, I'm still honoring my Baptist tradition. I love my friends there, and but yet I'm doing term papers that I've got a salt and pepper of Catholic and Protestant authors, right? So I finally, now here's where the beauty of the church starts to come back at me another time. as a single guy, and my father's passed, but dear old mom's up in Oregon. And during the fall, when the legislature's out of session, I would often accompany her someplace and then get her into Arizona where she'd winter down there. So this had gone on for a couple of years, and so this one time she calls me up. This is about 2000, just at the beginning of 2005, and she goes, "Skip, where are we going to go this fall?" And a friend had sent me a postcard from Rome, with a picture of St. Peter's there and the dome, and I was like, "Hey, let's go to Italy, Mom." And she'd never been to Europe, and she was excited. And I said, "Well, I'll set it up. We'll go to Venice, and we'll go to Assisi, and we'll go to Rome." Well, I mean, I've been in a lot of American Catholic churches, right? And a lot of it is sort of a minimalist sort of style, but no, not there. I mean, the church, the landscape of Italy is the church, and the art. It's fascinating. Side altars in St. Peter's are grand. I mean, you look at these things, and there's these altar pieces, and the soul that's put into this. It's reflective of the beauty. The transcendental beauty of God is reflected in the work. And to stand in the Sistine Chapel, where Michelangelo's done his work, is just so stunning. I had nothing to compare it with. It was just off the chart. And I remember with Mom, we got Wednesday audience tickets to join the new Pope Benedict and 15,000 of his closest friends all in the plaza there. And we had a wonderful times in the other cities, and this was the icing on the cake. Well, we're on the main aisle, and the Pope's coming down, and I'm this Baptist guy, but I kind of stand up above all these kind of short little Italian ladies, right, head above the crowd. So I've got my camera, and I'm looking at the Pope, and he kind of looks over at me. He gives me that click. And it was a Life magazine quality photo. And it showed up in the viewfinder after I took it. I went, "Whoa, Mom, you're going to like this shot, And I'll tell you what, after that, things changed. As I mentioned, I was going through this denominational discernment. And on about the last day of our trek, Mom just wanted to take it easy. And
have you been searching out Baptist churches while you were in Italy?
I couldn't find one. I was trying to. Although Mom would say, "No, we're going to go to the Catholic Church. That's why we're here." Okay, Mom. She'd been praying for me for years, and so she was very happy to have me with her. And so I said, I'm going to take off on just a last little jaunt, and I'm going to go to St. Paul's outside the walls. Well, we're in November, off season, midweek, rainy day, just not many people out looking around. So I'm in this magnificent nave, it's second only to St. Peter's in size. And I'm praying, I'm thinking, St. Peter, I understand he's buried under the high altar, So that's kind of hard to believe, but the church is old, so could be. Right then, the clouds above somewhere opened, and the sunlight blasted through these clerestory windows, illuminated the entire nave, especially over the high altar, as if God was saying, "Yep, he's here, pay attention." And I was like startled, and then I thought, well, okay, well and it faded. I thought, well, that's kind of Hollywoodish, But if God is really speaking to me, he'll come back, and then right on cue, the clouds parted again, the thing illuminated again, and I'm feeling like, well, that's for me. There was no one else in the nave. Again, one of those milestones. And so I thought, I spoke it out loud. The sense was so great. I thought, maybe I'll be a Roman Catholic priest. I journaled that November 17th, 2005. But rather than feel rather repulsed by the thought, because up until that time, I was like, that's not even that's not in the cards. After having my heart prepped for days and been blessed, I mean, I wasn't consciously thinking of that, but my heart was like there. And that thought thrilled me. It thrilled me. And I said, I've got to pursue this, at least be open to it.
Why don't we pause there?
We'll pause there.
There's a good time for us to break.
All
Our
right.
guest is Father Skip Thompson, and we'll come back just a moment and pick up on his, see if he gets home from Rome.
Yes.
Welcome back to The Journey Home. I'm your host, Marcus Grodi. Our guest is Father Jeff Skip Thompson, and I've rudely interrupted you. You're at St. Paul's outside the wall, right? And you've had this wonderful beam of light awakening you.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I think I said St. Peter was buried in the high, St. Paul's there.
Right.
St. Peter's over in St. Peter's, hence the name.
Right.
So, but yeah, this sense of the possibility of being a Roman Catholic priest was thrilling. But I was still Baptist, and I'm thinking to myself, well, that's a nice sense, that's a nice, interesting thing. We'll see if that happens. Maybe I'll do the via media and I'll be Episcopalian or something, right? Anyway, I get back to the States, and at some point I engaged the Coming Home Network and Journey Home, and I talked with Jim Anderson, or emailed Jim Anderson, who works with your members, and he was very kind with me, and we corresponded. And I think one of the materials, either he sent it or was recommended, was Mike Aquilina's book on how the Christians said the first Mass, or something like that.
Yeah.
And because now when I'd go to that retreat at New Camaldoli, I'd be in the Mass, and I wanted to know, is this just something that was sort of the traditions of men, Matthew 15:8, where it's just, we deny the grace of God by the traditions of men. And it certainly wasn't that. It was really clear that the Mass was, this is the genuine article. And you can go back to Justin Martyr's work in 155 AD, the Apologia, from which the word apologetics is taken. And he describes the sequence of the Mass and the elements of it. And here we are, basically, practically 2 millennia later, following the same recipe.
Right.
The language changes and there's an organic development, but this is the real deal. And so, through some of the guidance and materials and prayers of the network here, I found this encouragement, this drawing. So I finally go back, and I thought, I'm gonna get back home to Rome. So I get together with one of the monks, a priest, Father Isaiah Teichert, at New Camaldoli, and I'm there for retreat for a few days. And so at the end of that time, I'd prepared a list, and I sat down with him, and it was a legal pad, 2 columns full. And I said, "Bless me, Father, if I have sinned. My last confession was 40 years ago." And he goes, "Well, we've got a lot to talk about then." I said, "Yeah, we do." And so we spent an hour, and I was kind of moving through them too. We didn't want to set on many of them for very long. But at the end of that, he said to me, "That's a good confession, and you are what we call a big fish." I said, "Call me anything, just absolve me, But I was home now, and this was now sometime in the early summer of 2006. And dear old Mom came down with pancreatic cancer. So she'd had that trip in 05, 06, she's got cancer. And I decided, you know what, I'm really outside my usual career. I really wasn't doing much anymore with my consulting legislative advocacy. I was working with the Chaplains Association in California, and they loved the fact that I was going to seminary, but I said, you know what, I got to go. I got to take care of Mom. So I head back up to Oregon, where they knew me by Skip, by the way. I was Jeff in California. I get home to Oregon, and of course everybody's family all up there has always known me by Skip since my infancy. So that's where Skip came from. Anyway, I'm home with Mom. She finally dies in 2007, but I started going to daily Mass there, and she saw me return to the church, and she was, of course, elated. She and her lady friends been praying for all of her sons, myself included, for years. So I started to go to daily Mass in Lent, and then I just kept doing it. I just loved it. And so the pastor that was there at the time, he was on his way out to another church, but he said to me once, he goes, "Skip, you should be a priest, and you should go to Holy Apostles Seminary out in Cromwell, Connecticut." And I went, "Okay, thanks, Father Peter, but I'm really not at all sure I want to be a priest. And I sure don't want to go to Cromwell, Connecticut. I don't want to go to the East Coast. I'm a West Coast guy." But the interim pastor came in, and of course I'm doing daily Mass again, and over time he says, Father Mike Hinken, he said, "You should be a priest, Skip. You really should. And you should go to Holy Apostles Seminary out in Cromwell, Connecticut." And I'm thinking, have you guys been, they didn't know each other.
What was the reason for pointing out Holy
Apostles? Because they knew it was for later vocations.
Okay.
They were open for later vocations, and I certainly was late, if at all. And it was just a natural fit in their mind. And so then the permanent pastor came, same drill. He didn't know about Holy Apostles, but he said, "Skip, you should be a priest." And I thought, if I don't look into this, I'll regret it on my deathbed. And so I did. And I'm going to kind of set the stage for another one of these milestones. Yep. Roll back the tape to 2004 to New Camaldoli. In June, I'm there for a retreat. And while I'm there, Brother Anthony Barabee dies. And on June, and they asked me to help move the body from the bed to the casket. I said, "I'll be happy."
While you're there?
While I'm there.
Wow, okay.
A lot of the monks were older guys, and they wanted the stronger young guys, and they only had like 3 of those. And they wanted 6 at least to kind of move. So they asked me to help. I said, "I'll be happy to." I mean, you honor the dead, right? So I stayed there for his funeral mass, which was June 11th, 2004. And I remember the prior quoting his last words. He sort of revived in his last hours and said, "Lord, may my only reward be thy mercy." And I wrote that down. It was a beautiful prayer. And I kept that program in my journal. So that's in the past. Fast forward up now, we're back into 2000, now we're in 2008, and I'm looking into dioceses and orders, and everyone I'm saying, "You're too old, you're too old, you're too old." I'm not willing to go to Holy Apostles yet, but finally, I said, I've got to look into this. So I contact Father Brad Pierce out there. He was then the vocation director for our missionaries of the Holy Apostles. And I flew out from Oregon to Connecticut, and we talked, and he says, "Tell me about your journey," kind of like what you're asking. And I mentioned all these different events, and New Camaldoli, the hermitage, and he goes, "Oh, really?" He goes, "One of our guys moved out there years ago with the permission of our founder. And did you happen to run into Brother Anthony Barabee?" I said, "Yes." He said, "How's he doing?" I said, "He's passed, and I was there for his funeral." And he goes, "Whoa." He goes, "We sort of lost track of our brother, but you were there?" And I go, "And I have the program from his funeral. Here's his last words." Father Brad, "Well, this is providential. You belong with us." And so with that, I was sponsored with the missionaries of the Holy Apostles to begin studies at Holy Apostles Seminary, just like those priests had told me to do. And I had no idea that 4 years earlier, that encounter was going to be the turn on the doorknob from the inside to let me in. But you can't manufacture that kind of stuff. So that's journaled. That's all loaded in there. But then with that, I was open to the priesthood. Yeah.
Our audience watching are probably not used to seeing a tan.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about the order that you're involved with.
Yeah. The Society of the Missionaries of the Holy Apostles is a society of apostolic life. We are of pontifical right, so our auspices comes from the Bishop of Rome. Our charism and mission is to promote, form, and accompany men to the priesthood and other lay leaders in the church, men and women. So we have our founder was Franciscan. We're aggregated with the Order of Friars Minor, which is where the brown color comes from. But we're not Franciscans in the ordered sense. So we have kind of a Roman Catholic. So we got kind of the best of both worlds going on. Our founder, Father Eusèbe Menard, was a French Canadian. He always remained, he was an Order of Friars Minor. He remained a Franciscan all his life. But he kicked it off, and we partner with the laity. It's a big part of our charism is the partnership with laity. So he kind of predated Vatican II in that regard. But he founded, through the assistance of Brother Anthony Barraby, he founded Holy Apostles Seminary. Brother Anthony's background was real estate. And so he found the present site where the seminary is. Basically said, here's where your seminary is going to go, Father, and that's where they are. But we serve that. We serve the seminary.
How did it particularly get that seminary designated as for the later vocations?
Okay, good question. Yes. Father Menard began bringing priests to the church through his retreats, especially men's retreats. And as he brought men closer to Christ, and their opening to the Holy Spirit in their own lives, desiring to follow the Lord, this priestly call would well up and become clear. And so he began to build seminaries. And that was his main work. So he moved from Montreal, Canada, to Cromwell, Connecticut, down to South America, to Peru and Colombia and other places, and Cameroon and Africa. He built these seminaries for later vocations. Now, back in the 40s and the 50s, a later vocation was someone in their 20s or 30s who had not come up through the minor seminaries from age 14 on, and then finished off as a young adult at age 22, 25. And then were ordained. 25 was the minimum age for priestly ordination. So they would have quite a long run to prepare for that, maybe 10 years plus or minus. But there was a lot of strong young men in their late 20s and 30s, especially after the war, veterans who'd seen a lot of good, they'd seen life, not all good, but they were tough, strong men of devotion. And he wanted to bring them into the church as well. And so he started this movement toward later vocations, and he opened it up. In fact, our particular society receives men up to age 50, and we can kind of fudge a little bit, So they did for me. I was over 50 when I first inquired. I think I was 54. So as it's worked out, it affirmed that call that I first remembered in the Basilica of St. Paul's outside the walls. And so, interestingly enough, I was ordained only about 2 years ago, June 29th, the Solemnity of Peter and Paul. Go figure, right? But I quoted in the back of my program the journal entry from November 17th, 2005, when I first sensed it. And these on the journey home, I need these mileposts, and they just really affirm the faith.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. The different mileposts really point to the fact that God guides in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're real pushes, sometimes they're little nidges.
Right.
And even sometimes he uses suffering to awake us to it, as he did both with your son and your mother.
Right.
To deal with that.
Right.
But also I was wondering, your time away from the church in the Baptist world, reflect on how that was an important part of forming who you are today.
Yeah. We have a lot to learn from our Protestant brethren, especially their love for the Scripture. Yeah. I mean, that's got to be underscored to every Catholic priest out there, make sure your parishioners get their nose in the Scriptures, especially the Gospels. Learn about Christ. Ignorance of Scripture is ignorance of Christ, as St. Jerome said. But you can't love who you don't know, right? So by just reading this is God-breathed, it's inspired accounts of the life of Christ, his words and actions. So this is something that we focused on in the Baptist church where I was. And it was a very, what I'll call Catholic-friendly church. Our pastor, Kent Carlson, and Mike Lucan, the other senior pastor, were very open to receiving what they would consider the traditions of the older church. And I would say that's really the mother lode. I mean, our spirituality as Christians all has a Roman trunk, no matter where we are. Right. And that Scripture itself comes from the tradition of the church that said, these books, these letters, these are inspired. And by the authority the church has, we have an authoritative Scripture. So in the Baptist tradition, the Scripture is the dominant. I mean, that's the rule of faith, right. And you dig into it, and there's tremendous graces that comes from that.
This email from Carol kind of connects on another side here. She writes from Alabama. She says, what are a few of the main theological differences between the Baptist faith and Catholicism that Father Thompson had to reconcile before returning to the Catholic Church?
Okay, great question. I'm going to focus on the Eucharist, because sacramental theology is part and parcel of our faith, and the source and summit, of course, is the Eucharist, as Sacrosanctum Concilium says. We find in our tradition what was beginning from John chapter 6. You have to eat my body, drink my blood, or you have no life in you. So there's this connection between the material and the immaterial, the physical and the spiritual. And we know that we're going to be resurrected someday physically. So this connection between the physical and the spiritual is our being. I mean, we are a soul-body composite. One without the other is either a ghoul or a ghost. I mean, a body without a soul, that's a zombie, right? A soul without a body, that's a ghost. I mean, we're a composite, so there's spirit and matter. And the church understands this, and that's why Jesus participated in baptism with John, why he gave us the Eucharist. And so the sacraments that he's instituted are our normal, ordinary means that they signify the grace that they deliver at the same time. So my Baptist theology, which looked upon it, as symbol, right. A beautiful symbol, and they revere that symbol, but the theology doesn't let them engage the fullness of the faith. And that's what I really, really responded to as my heart was drawn back to the church, was to respond to that sacramental theology and to resolve that and say, that's the mother lode, that's the truth. Yeah. That's what I want to do. I want to integrate my physical being with my spiritual, rebirth.
Protestant, my background too.
Yeah.
The sacraments point to something, and from the good standpoint, they really do point to what they want to be an authentic relationship with Christ, an authentic changed life.
Right.
But they don't necessarily see that the sacrament itself had anything directly to do with that, but it points to it.
Yeah.
We recognize in, as you said, the both and, that it really does.
Yeah.
The graces that are there affect the fact that we are no longer the same. We've been changed. We're new creations. The old's gone, the new has come.
Yeah. And it is the both and, because what my Baptist friends had in just abundance was this evangelical, they've been evangelized. And that's what the Catholic Church lacks in a great degree, is we need to get the word into the heart and respond to the living word Christ in our life, and make that choice, that jump into the reality of our faith. Because if it's just a sacrament I play, it's like a rabbit's foot for good luck or something. I mean, you can miss it's an adventure in missing the point when you just go to church and think that's the end all. Well, the church is there because it's Christ's church, and if you want to truly know his church, you got to know him, right? And so that was the thing that my
the
Baptist
sacraments
brother-
aren't magic.
No.
They have to, it's again, the both and. The graces are there, but we have to act on those graces.
Yeah.
We have to, it involves faith, which in itself is a gift of grace.
Right,
but
right.
there's so much more going on here that sometimes we take for granted.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
That evangelization and that whole changed life, we can sometimes take for granted in our wonderful church.
Yeah, we get so used to the furniture, we forget what it's really all about. We see the altar, we see the tabernacle. This was beautiful stuff. And after you've met Christ, you know that this all has purpose and is designed to deliver him to you. That's the definition of grace.
We'll take another email. Michael from Arkansas. Why do Catholics think that you need the sacraments in order to be saved? It's Jesus' blood that cleanses us, not some man-made ritual. What kind of basis is there in Scripture for the idea of sacraments?
Mm-hmm. Good question. I'd point him to Mark's Gospel, where Jesus tells us we must believe and be baptized. It's all throughout. You see it throughout the New Testament. It's not one or the other. In some ways, he's right on the point that we are saved by the blood of Christ. We have to respond in faith to that. But part of that response of faith is to engage the sacraments he's given to us. He didn't just do it for fun. Said, oh, this is a kind of a neat little ceremony. No, there's something to it that comes through the authority that he gave his church through Peter. Here's the keys of the kingdom. What you bind on earth, you bind in heaven, and loose and so on. That authority is active to deliver a sacrament of grace. Without it, it's not a sacrament.
Yeah, through the blood of Christ, the entire world has been redeemed.
Yes.
Right? Everyone's been redeemed. But they need to hear about Christ. They need to surrender their life to Christ. They need to be changed by grace. There's more to.
They have to cooperate.
But the foundation of that is the blood of Christ has redeemed us all.
If that's not there, what do we embrace?
Yeah.
So we have to respond to it. And I think that's the message a lot of Catholics have to get. We need to respond to the author of grace.
What would you say? You're unique as a later vocation. What's the goods and the bads of a late vocation?
Okay. I'll start with the bads. Old habits. Old habits die hard. There's a kind of a formation. There's sort of a relativism. It's in the air we breathe, where we kind of think of our faith as just our own thing. And that takes a little breaking. And frankly, in the desolations we were talking about that earlier, that breaking that converts us, that can break through the bads and the baggage. We have that. The goods are the fact that we've been around the block. We have our gold stars and our scars. And so we have this resources perspective of what I'll call hot stove learning, and we know why we're here. A lot of young guys will examine the thought and, want to keep their options open. Maybe they'll be married, maybe not. Guys who are 45 or so, give or take, have been around. And if the calling comes to them at that point, with the perspective they have, it's something that I think sticks. And that's part of the good. And they bring that to their ministry.
I've mentioned this many times on the program. 2 Corinthians begins with that statement by Paul that we're comforted that we might comfort.
Exactly.
And I think about your own journey, having had a broken marriage, annulled later on. But the point is, you know what that's like.
Yeah.
The death of a son, you know what you've been through that, and that equips you in a unique way.
It does,
as a minister.
I did a parish mission a couple weeks ago in Rhode Island, and one of the responses on the evaluation was that Father Skip has been where we are, and there's a credibility that exists because of that experience that just wouldn't be there otherwise. So that's part of the good of the late vocation. Yeah.
All right. Let's say there's a Baptist out there watching.
Yeah.
Why should he come home?
It's motherload. I come back. Our Christian faith that's the trunk. Until 1054, for a millennia, Christianity was Roman. The headquarters was in Rome. If it had been in Antioch, where Paul and Peter had died and passed on the baton, it would be the Antiochian Catholic Church. It just happened to be Rome. But I think also by design. But the fullness of the faith is there. And, I would say to the Baptist wherever he is, if you're open to the leading of God, if you're open to Christ, which I'm sure he is, then go to the next level and be open to Christ's body and the church and objectively look at it. Because we have a lot of subjectivity that often blocks us, but you examine the church, it's all there.
Father, thank you very much for joining
Marcus.
us on the journey home.
Thank you for your ministry.
And thank you for joining us on the journey home. I do pray that Father Skip's journey is an encouragement to you. God bless you. See you next week.